And good morning and good afternoon to all. I'm really honoured and delighted to join such an important session on the future of transnational education between the UK and Bulgarian universities. I was writing down some reflections and notes during this morning's session. And I have to say, I'm really excited and heartened to hear that there is an international education strategy in the making for Bulgarian higher education. And the transnational education is a prominent strand in that strategy. Typically, when we talk about international strategy for higher education, it is often a signal that the country is ready to engage internationally. Typically, what this signaling indicates is that a country is open to receive international students, international academics, researchers. But I think that what transnational education opens the doors for, or the possibilities for, is mobility in all its shapes. So we're talking about global mobility of students, but equally global mobility of academic programs and higher education institutions, which is the case of international branch campuses. In that space, I would like to pick on one of the points that Susanna made in her presentation. The transnational education actually supports the internationalization of local education systems. And the areas where I have observed this happening on the ground is, I would like to draw some parallels in Europe. And this is the research that, again, the British Council commissioned recently, and we updated it just a few months ago. The paper was published in December. From all the transnational education students that we surveyed in Europe, most of the TNE has taken place through the means of English language. Of those students, we found that 46% were international students studying in another European country. And from those students, a significant proportion of them had a mobility component attached to their program. So we don't just have a mobility of programs, so foreign programs being taught in a country, but we also have a high element of student mobility that goes hand in hand with the mobility of academic programs. Also, in relation to that, I would also like to highlight another point from Susanna's presentation about a key feature of UK transnational education is collaborative provision. And this is when the academic programs are co-created. And typically, this leads to the award of a double degree or degree which is awarded from each of the participating higher education institutions, or a joint degree when the award is jointly issued by two or more universities. So the collaborative TNE is the one that has grown most significantly over the past years, and at the moment, it accounts for about 42% of the overall UK transnational education provision. I would also like to pick up a point that was raised by Ms. Desislava Mitova in her presentation when she talked about improving the labour market conditions in Bulgaria, and it touched a really sensitive point about brain drain. I think that one of the perhaps critical contributions of UK transnational education is that it supports students in their home country. And as such, it is perceived to contribute to significant reductions of brain drain, simply because it brings the education programs to the location of the students. And as such, students that may be typically unable to travel internationally, they can still benefit from an international degree. In addition to that, it also brings the benefits of globally recognized programs, programs that are recognized by the labor markets in more than one country. As such, it increases not just access to globally recognized degree, but it also contributes to the labor market's recognition of the degree that the student acquires. I guess I've used my Q&A slot as a facilitator of the Q&A slot just to draw on some reflections from this morning's contributions. And I have to say that I really enjoyed the presentation from Ms. Ivana Radonova and the link she made to the Bulgaria's forthcoming new international strategy. And also Ms. Natalia Efremova, Deputy Minister of Labour and Social Policy. So I'm not sure whether there are any particular questions on employability and transnational education. I'm happy to share some reflections, but I think we've got such fantastic speakers that spoke in this morning's session on transnational education. That'd be really good to engage their reflections and their thoughts. So any questions? Perhaps you can use the chat function to raise questions or raise your hand. And I don't know, Dobby, whether you'll be able to upgrade any of the audience members to the panel so they can ask their questions face to face, or just use the chat function.
Well, I'll be following definitely the chat function, but yeah, please, I would encourage the participants because I see there are quite a lot of professors also involved, not only people who are, let's say, transnational education, how to say, specialists within a university, but also concrete professionals that are leading their departments or faculties activities. And I would really encourage them to ask specifically if they, minding that they are already having ideas of possibilities to develop transnational education partnerships, if they have concrete questions about the different types of transnational education partnerships that they could develop. Is it because, as you remember, Janet, and thank you for being able, as I said, to join us during this second phase of the program, of the TNE program. But as you remember, during the first phase, we discussed also with Ivana from the Ministry of Education that it's usually programs related to master degrees or PhD degrees that are explored, minding the different accreditation aspects, as well as also, as Ivana mentioned, the specifics in relation to regulated professions. And I think that many of the participants also, in relation to the assessments that you did before we started these webinar sessions and including the previous one, you made certain assessments and research trying to observe the university's ideas in what kind of programs they would like to get involved. And many of them either mentioned joint degrees or double degrees, and a few would mention research collaborations. And here we have also participants not only from universities, but also from different institutes, part of the, let's say, Bulgarian Academy of Science. They're accredited institutes, and they'll have, of course, the possibility to share their ideas and their programs. So it's also about possibilities to exchange academic teams and research programs. And I would really encourage the participants, if they have questions now, to ask them about the specific programs, no matter in what professional field, so that we use this Q&A session to try to, how to say, elaborate some more and see if there's any difficulties that they have already, let's say, explored, or some challenges that could be an obstacle, let's say, that they would like to discuss and see what we could do and how this program could probably support their efforts in a way to really manage some fruitful TNE programs, because as we know, there could be different challenges. And as Ivan also mentioned, the legislation in some areas could have, let's say, certain gaps, and we would like to really explore these gaps and see how we could overcome them. Of course, using this platform, this program for discussion with institutions, and so we could ease the process, if I can say so, in terms of setting up TNE programs. And maybe one more thing I would like to add for all the participants to be aware of is that we also would like at some point this year to be able to foster and facilitate face-to-face sessions between possible partners. So it's really important, I think, to use these sessions and ask questions that could be answered throughout the time before the face-to-face type of meetings really happen.
Toby, I think we've got a few questions and comments in the chat option, and if I can take the liberty to share some of the findings from the previous research that was carried out, that Lyubov Kostova commissioned when she was with the British Council. Because I think it answers some of the questions raised in the chat. Would that be okay if I
please
share my screen? It is yes, we did. That was last year. We did carry out a research with Bulgarian institutions, and I have to say that I was quite pleasantly surprised to see that. Almost all Bulgarian universities took part in the study. So we had 44 universities that answered the survey that Lyubov and Ivailo at the British Council published last year. So the major interest in terms of a level of study from the Bulgarian universities was in taught masters programs. So one institution will typically express several areas of interest. So we have taught masters, bachelor programs, and doctoral training, all being quite prominently high up on as areas of interest. But it's also in terms of, I saw Lucy Reynolds' question about tuition fees, the areas of concerns, or what this is completed by the Bulgarian universities. What are the areas that they feel they're holding them back, or areas that they may see as potential barriers? And this is areas that have to be addressed in discussion between the UK partner institutions and the Bulgarian counterparts. Is Bulgarian universities felt that the level of tuition fees charged by the international partners may be deterring some of their students. So this is that came as a top concern, with almost half of the universities raising it as an issue. And interestingly, the lack of experience in developing joint programs or collaborative programs was also significant consideration on behalf of the Bulgarian partners. So the lack of experience in forging such partnerships was raised as a concern. So this is an area to be mindful of. But also around areas such as the resources, the development of these programs would require was basically the second most important area, the regulatory requirements. And I think that it wasn't the actual regulatory requirements, but the lack of awareness of those, of exactly what are the loopholes that universities would have to jump over to when they develop such partnerships. And this is probably, it just highlights an area that possibly a manual in terms of how to do TNE in Bulgaria may be a useful area to explore, so that it's a very straightforward process. When institutions develop a collaborative program, this is how it's done. And these are the regulatory requirements that need to be met in order to develop the program. There was also a question around what types of programs are of most interest. So interestingly, I saw the comment from the Montfort University. Yes, joint and double degrees and franchise programs are right on the top of the list. So these were actually responses from the universities, UK universities, that are interested to collaborate with Bulgarian institutions. So joint double degrees, franchise and validation programs were right on the top of the list, but also enhancing TNE programs with some research partnerships was also an area that was highlighted as important. I think that the subjects, there are some subject-specific sessions that will join in a moment. So I'll stop sharing. I hope that this is just a reflection on the survey, which more or less all the Bulgarian institutions that took place last year. So hopefully those are still valid.
Thank you, Janet. And actually, there was also a question about does Bulgaria has TNE partnerships experience? And I answered to our colleagues in the chat that there are currently 2 big TNE partnerships between universities. One of them is with Cardiff Metropolitan University and the Varna University of Management, who also have a branch in Sofia. And they presented their partnership during our last session, and you can see the presentation online on the program's landing page that we've sent. And there is another big TNE partnership between the New Bulgarian University and the University of York. Previously, they partnered with the University of Sheffield. There are some other universities that had TNE partnerships with the University of Sheffield as well, that will be presenting tomorrow during the session for finance and economics. And actually, Bulgaria has a lot of TNE partnerships. I mean, we have experience with that with EU, let's say, country representatives, university representatives, but also non-EU universities, including the US. So yeah, there are quite a lot of TNE partnerships. They're also they're published publicly on the National Statistical Institute's Bulgarian National Statistical Institute website. But of course, I can upload that on the landing page of the program, so you can see the different programs. There are different programs on different languages. For example, the Technical University in Sofia, which is one of the leading universities in relation to artificial intelligence and computer science and technology, they have a program in French, they have a program in German language. So it's quite a popular, let's say, solution. And we have quite a lot of international students, not only in Sofia, but in other big towns in the country as well. So it's a practice.
And if I can interject here,
yeah, of course.
Just an example of the transnational programs. There was a mention of York College, and interestingly, in the first series of events that took place last November, there was a really fantastic presentation from York College in Thessaloniki on their transnational education programs with the New Bulgarian University. And I have to say that it's not very often that I'm properly surprised in the space of TNE, but I was really, really surprised by the high number or high volume of Bulgarian students on University of York programs taught in Thessaloniki. So really high number. And just reflecting on the presentation earlier by Dr. Susanna Tomasi on Greece being the highest, basically TNE destination for UK programs. But as we established in that first seminar, so many of the students in Greece, Greek TNE students, were actually from Bulgaria. And I think that what is probably an interesting characteristic here is a very strong regional mobility between the countries and Bulgaria's neighboring countries to and fro on various programs. And I guess what the UK TNE record doesn't at the moment allow us to capture is how international and diverse the TNE population is, and that the program taught, for example, in Greece is highly attractive for international students in the area. And as such, it's not just, it doesn't mean that it's solely taught to Greek students. And I suspect that that's probably may turn to be true. It's still early days, may turn to be true for TNE taught in Bulgaria, that may actually result in being highly attractive to international students that are either in Bulgaria or go to Bulgaria to take up the respective program. So this intra-regional mobility component or characteristic of TNE programs is, I think, is really critical here.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, you're just mentioning some of the many reasons why my colleagues, who unfortunately are now elaborating more with the Sofia Sans Festival, Ivailo and Lubov, but we'll have the opportunity for them to join us as moderators and share about their future plans. They were part of the British Council, but some of these reasons that you're mentioning are actually the ones that fostered the idea to have the UK Bulgarian TNE program established initially by the British Council and the embassy, because definitely we see a big interest in terms of people from bordering countries, because also, as one of the latest researches done by the British Council in the sphere, we noticed that definitely people would like to be closer to the home country and closer to their families. I mean, from one side, they would like to, of course, explore opportunities to meet with others, but it's also being close to their families in a way, and elaborate in relation to local economy.
If I might, I would like to ask a question for Susanna while she's on the call here. Susanna, we heard in the earlier session that Bulgaria is about to embark on a international strategy for higher education, where institutional collaboration is one of the major strands, and this also means transnational education. I wonder, from your perspective, UK is a country that has had international strategy at a national level for more than 20 years. Can you highlight what do you see as the main benefits for the universities in the country from having this national level of endeavour to promote internationalization of higher education?
Oh, I think that's a really interesting question, probably one that we could discuss for quite some time, because it's so broad and there are so many different perspectives, I guess. I would say there are quite a few benefits. So I would say one probably is that such a strategy will provide a really good framework for both the sector itself, so say universities, higher education institutions. Presumably that strategy will cover other subsectors, so not just higher education, but also primary education, secondary education, technical education, edtech, and so on. That would be my assumption, because otherwise it's a bit difficult to extract only one subsector and sort of ignore other aspects of education. And I think that would be a brilliant framework for the sector itself within Bulgaria, but also for other stakeholders. So starting, for example, with the Ministry of Education, you can use that to perhaps decide how to redistribute funds. What are the priorities? Because I'm sure if you have 5 different stakeholders in the room, you have 5 different sets of priorities. So the strategy provides you perhaps a high level directions where you want to be within a certain period of time. It's also really helpful, for example, for us. So when foreign universities look for partnerships overseas, they often look at international strategies within a certain country. So, for example, if a certain activity is being prioritized, perhaps certain subject area or level of studies or certain activity, then obviously that implies that that specific activity might be a priority and might be the leading kind of theme for a partnership. So yeah, plenty of different stakeholders, I'm sure different points of views, but the strategy itself, I would see it as a really great framework to go ahead and focus on specific aspects, because it's difficult to cover everything within a fixed amount of time. And obviously, budgets are always an issue. We always would like to have bigger budgets than we have. And in that sense, we've got an opportunity to perhaps focus on something specific.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And thank you, Susanna. And I wonder from the Bulgarian policymakers that we have in the room, is there any timeline for the new international strategy? When do you expect to see that published? Would there be a consultation that will lead to any specific targets or commitments under this new international strategy?
Yeah, actually, I had the same question for Ivana.
It's not an international strategy, actually. It's part of the higher education strategy, which is in force since 2021, and the end of the strategy is 2030. So by 2030, we should say higher level of internationalization of the sector. And different measures are foreseen there. I mean, both at the institutional and at national level. So, as I said, it's not a matter of a separate strategy, but part of the entire higher education strategy. And in a way, it shows how important the internationalization is, because the higher education strategy is the only self-contained strategy in the sector of education. The other parts of the educational sector, they have separate different strategy, but it is for primary, secondary education and VET. Here for the higher education, we have one strategy, and it involves concrete measures and activities for internationalization. If you ask me what is the most important in this sense, I believe that this is the level of understanding and the meaning of the internalization as a means to both to raise the quality and to maintain the high quality in the fields we have it at such level. So this is important to know that the internationalization, it's not an aim itself. This is something that we need to have in order to achieve certain goals. And yes, as Susanna said before, we need to know where we are and what we do need to have in the future. So if you ask me, I will tell you, I will actually quote one of the former ministers of education that the higher education strategy is one of the best strategies we have. And it is a really good document. But for me, what is important is the implementation of the strategy, and the results will happen in the end.
I wonder whether if there is a link to the strategy, and if there are any indicators or targets,
yes.
that'd be really beneficial to see.
There is a link, and there is a link to the strategy in English. It's available on the Ministry of Education and Science website under strategy and policy unit on the webpage. And there is also an action plan and operational plan for 3 years from 2021 to 2024. The action plan applies to the entire period, but in the action plan you can see both the indicators and the funding sources, which is also very good because we know where the money would come from. And something I'm also saying when we talk about funding, I don't think that it's that much matter of the funding itself as an amount. It's much more important how we allocate this funding.
And can the Bulgarian universities access these funding pots as a matter to, for example, internationalize their programs? And this can be done through development of double awards with overseas universities, in that case, British universities.
I'm sorry, Janet, I had some connection troubles and I missed the first part of
I wonder whether the Bulgarian universities would be able to access those funds if they want to develop international programs with UK universities, for example, double awards or franchise degrees.
This is another question to the funding, which is not really easy to answer because the funding nowadays is available under different criteria and not about the internationalization. Here we can use European funds or programs, different EU programs like Horizon Europe, sorry, or Erasmus Plus. But we also have in place a new instrument called national programs to support the development of the public universities, which is not good because the private ones stay a little behind, which should not be the case in this sense. But still, national programs could be another instrument to support. For example, in terms of European university alliances that are established, and British universities can be part of such alliances. But as we only have this possibility set in the Higher Education Act since, I think, since 2020, this is quite a new instrument, and we still work on development of programs that will really fit to the needs of the universities. So this is a very good idea, actually, Janet. Thank you very much, because this is something that we can consider for the future, to establish a special national program or to establish a way to support our universities, both public and private, in this regard, to the TNE cooperation and especially the British Bulgarian cooperation.
It seems like a nice segue into phase 3 of the transnational education UK-Bulgarian partnerships.
Yes.
So thank you very much for that. I can see the demand is certainly there from the Bulgarian institutions. 44 of them, they all expressed interest in the development of such programs. So it will be very timely initiative, very well timed.
All right, well, maybe minding the time frame, we could, if there are no more questions for the current time, I think we managed to answer most of the most of the questions we had different participants writing. I tried to also provide some feedback in the chat. But if there are no other urgent questions, maybe we could take a short break before we gather up for the next session, which will be specifically focusing on cybersecurity and computer science and artificial intelligence. I don't know, Janet, what do you think?
It sounds great. I suppose it's I don't know, second breakfast in the UK and lunchtime in Bulgaria. It's yes, a break would be well timed.
Yeah, for a coffee or grabbing a sandwich for those of us who would be able to join us for the next session. Well, because not everyone will be actually there for the computer science and cybersecurity, but well, then thank you all for being able to make it early this morning, especially in the UK, and all the Bulgarian participants for joining us. I hope now it's a bit more clear how these partnerships could be settled. And of course, we'll have Janet and Ivana be with us. Thank you, Susanna, for being able to join us despite your tight schedule and share these very interesting TNE facts and your expertise, of course. And we will continue now with the subject-specific series of sessions. So anyone who is interested, please just stay tuned, and we'll be uploading all the presentations, and we'll put the recordings from the sessions on the TNE landing page, which I've dropped in the chat box as well.